Hello, my name's Jason, and welcome to another episode of me painting. Actually, we're not painting today. We're just talking this time, and we have a special guest today, Mr. Nathan Fowkes. Thanks very much for coming on the show.
Well, and being a Brit, you pronounce my name correctly.
Yes.
That's where it comes from originally, I'm
Ah,
told. So yeah, most people say folks when they see my name written, but Fouke, so
ah.
you nailed it. It's great to be here with you, Jason.
Excellent, thank you. So, if you don't mind, do you mind saying how you got into the art world?
Yeah, oh my gosh. Um, was it a direct route? I always I you know, kids start kids draw from the youngest age and gradually find what they're interested, and just evolve into whatever it is. And so I drew a lot like all kids do. I just never stopped. I just loved it and wanted to do it
Yeah.
more and more. And I grew up in an area that to me had a real magical light. Even as a little kid, there was a quality of light there that I swore, I knew I wanted to be an artist. And I swore I was going to be able to figure out how to make things look like that with paint. So, I was pretty active through high school and into college and went to art school and always wanted to be both a traditional artist and a commercial illustrator of some kind, throwing around some imagination. And in the 90s was the amazing animation boom. And so I had an opportunity. I'd been working and working and working as a painter, focusing on places, people, color, light, environment. And so opportunities came my way, and I found myself as an artist in the animation industry starting in, let's see, 1996.
Wow. 96. Where was
Back in,
I?
yeah, you have the flame of youth on your side, Jason. I won't ask you how old you were in '96. I think I was because I went to regular college and then I
Yeah.
went to art school after that. And so I was by the time, and then I worked, I actually worked in theme park show design for a couple of years out of school, out of college. And then after that, an opportunity to show my portfolio at DreamWorks came along. And let's see, I was 26 years old at that time. And I don't know, it's been a roller coaster ride ever since. It's been fantastic.
Wow. It's pretty amazing, actually. I've got a few questions from our viewers. Are you okay to answer a few?
I can do that, yeah.
Okay. Here we go. Here's the first one. This is from. I haven't put the names just in case I didn't pronounce everyone's names properly. So I've got a few. My first one, which is my question. I've actually got two questions. My first one is this is one that I've been wondering after I did your classes, actually. For people that don't know, I learned about Nathan Fowkes through Schoolism.com, and there's a group of classes on there, four classes by yourself, which kind of partner well together, to be honest, because there's a bit of colour and light. There's a colour and light main one, but that's mixed in with the others, so they all kind of go together. And there's you mention in the watercolor and gouache painting that white is cold. And I was thinking to myself when I was painting, why is white, when you paint white on anything as a highlight, just pure white, it does look cold, but I don't know why. Do you know
Yeah.
why?
Yeah, it's such a simple little thing, and yet it's such a big, important question. Because if you can control your white, I think you can likely control color pretty well. Technically speaking, who knows, but the sunshine is warm. It's a warm white. The world's bathed in warm light from the sun, and so that typically that infuses everything. And I think in nature, you know, when we see that pure quality of white, it tends to be more snow, tends to be more ice, it tends to be those
Yeah.
cold colors. And nature, there's a lot of warmth in nature. And so, pure white next to the browns and the greens and the warm sunshine of nature will have a tendency to be cold. But even more important than that, when you mix your other pigments with your whites, I, I, I suggest to students that they think of white when they're mixing with white. They think of white as being very light gray. Just think of it that way because that's what it does to most of our pigments. It makes them more neutral and it makes them colder. It's just the way that it reflects light. And if you want that, it's great. Maybe there's a cool overcast sky and you're mixing different colors and you want that cold quality. Maybe you're doing a portrait and you're doing it in beautiful north light from a north facing window. You can do rich, warm flesh tones and you can mix whites right into those warms to get them lighter and they'll automatically turn cooler compared to the warm flesh tone. And you can very easily get that brilliant contrast, luminous contrast of warm flesh tones with the cooler highlights coming from a north light window. And so it's a beautiful thing when you need it to do that. But the rest of the time, if you don't want cold and you're mixing white into it, you got to fight like crazy to keep that clean. You got to slip yellows and some of maybe yellow gold. I really love using cadmium yellow deep, which is a golden yellow. And when I want my lights to stay warm, but I also need them to be very light, very bright, I'll slip that color in and it keeps that warmth of sunshine in it. So, you master mixing white properly in your work and so many things fall into place for you. So it's a great question.
That's an interesting one. I've been thinking about that actually quite a lot. Another one from me. Is there any 2D animation movies that you thought, when you was younger and you was watching, like me, I thought Popeye was amazing, and I was like, I'd love to be able to be involved in something like that. Is there any 2D animation movies that you thought, oh wow, this is amazing, I want to work in animation?
It's funny that the answer to that question is no, there's not. Because there's lots of stuff I admired and liked. The funny thing about it is I didn't expect or plan specifically to go into animation coming up. I thought going through art school, the animation boom hadn't happened yet, and maybe like in the 80s. And so I thought I'd do things like book covers and illustration, fantasy illustration. I don't mean like swords and wizards, but just imagination, that sort of a thing. And I didn't specifically plan to go into animation, but through art school, the push was editorial illustration, very conceptual editorial illustration, print illustration. And that had been the thing, the 60s, 70s, 80s. That's where a commercial illustrator made their living. And it was clear that that was dying, and it was dying fast. And so there were a bunch of us, a group of us, we kind of saw what was coming on the horizon and pushed ourselves in that direction. And when I got invited to visit DreamWorks Animation for the first time, like I mentioned at the top, I had actually managed to get a job, what I felt like was a pretty good job. I was hired for a theme park show design company to design, no engineering. Don't worry, if I was designing roller coaster engineering, it'd be a bloodbath. But someone's got to, there's theming, there's all the theming and decorative, and they want you to feel like it's a journey and an adventure, and someone's got to design that stuff. And so we did Universal Studios, we did stuff for Disneyland, and it was a good job. But I got this invite to DreamWorks, and I wasn't even planning. I thought, well, I gotta go visit. When I got there, I didn't know anything about what they were doing. They were working on the Prince of Egypt, and they had already hired some serious pros doing initial development on the show. And so there was already some concept artwork done. And they had it up on the walls. And I went in there and I saw this artwork. It was epic. It was luminous. It was painterly. It was theatrical. It was everything I wanted to be and I wanted to do as an artist, especially the work of Paul Lassane. And so that became a mission. I had to work on this project. Paul Lassane was the person who hired me and interviewed me. And so I had a chance to talk to him, to look at his paintings. I gave him an underhanded compliment that could have gone terribly wrong, but he took it in the right way. I think he even appreciated it. Because we looked at his work and I said to him, I said, so these are your paintings, huh? And he said, yeah, these are my paintings. And I said, you know what? I am making it my mission in life to outdo you. That was my way of complimenting this work. Oh my gosh, it was everything I wanted to do. Well, I got in, they were looking for painters, and I was a painter. And I got in and we did the Prince of Egypt, amazing experience. And I was, for 15 years, I was at DreamWorks for 15 years. So the true answer to your question was, it was Paul Lassane and the Prince of Egypt that convinced me to be on the Prince of Egypt. So I totally forgot about theme park design. That was done and gone at that point. I haven't looked back. It's been the greatest thing ever.
Wow. So I can roll into this other question then. So you must have had a lot of experience doing, well, you've done a lot of 2D. How do you make your 2D work, even though it is on a flat piece of paper or on the screen, how do you make it look three-dimensional? How do you make your paintings go from two-dimensional flat to a three-dimension?
Yeah, that's the trick. And it's especially in animation. Even though I'm still a 2D artist, that's what I love. That's what I'll always be. I've passed on the opportunity to do 3D modeling and 3D. I do a little bit, just enough. I need to have some basics to work in the animation pipeline. But that's definitely not my primary focus, because, and I always tell my students, even if you're working in animation, even if you're very graphic and very stylized, you still have to have an aspect to your work that lets the audience step into a place that they cannot go to in real life. And it has to have a compelling believability where they step into it, they're immersed in it, they get lost in it. And so, but the funny thing about that is I learned that from 2D painting, because I'm thinking of specifically one painting that I studied. I've always loved the artist Richard Schmid, and if anyone wants to look him up, he's a magnificent figurative and landscape painter. Schmid is his name. And he had this one painting that just had this amazing depth to it. And it was just, it was just a hill with some trees and then some houses in the far distance. Nothing special, and yet it was gorgeous. And it had this, it was just this, it was in a magazine. This is back in the 80s. And so it's a little print in a magazine, maybe. Man, I have to talk in centimeters to you instead of inches.
Oh, no, I still work in inches, actually.
You all right? Yeah, I can say inches come easy. I have to think about centimeters. But, it's like it must be a little 3-inch by 5-inch print in this art magazine. But the foreground was warm, and it had heavy texture, very little detail, but it had a nice thick texture and big brush strokes. And then the brush strokes just got smaller and smaller and smaller as they went in the distance. And there, the cool atmospheric light that comes down from the sky really influenced more and more as the painting went back in the distance. And then he would do little things like there's a log in the painting that kind of follows perspective lines heading back in the distance. And there's little kind of just paths, not a literal path, but just kind of like people have walked there, and it kind of gives the lay of the land and leads you back into the distance. And then the edges in front are sharper. The edges in the far distance were softer, and there are all these overlaps. There's the hill, and then the tree, and then the next tree, and then the house, and then the house behind that, and then the hills behind that, and then the cloud, and then the cloud, and then the cloud. And so it's all the key elements of, warm versus cool, of contrast, high contrast versus low contrast, large versus small, warm versus cool, the overlap. And you combine all of these things together, and you have this little image that has this vast depth that goes on for kilometers and kilometers. See, I use kilometers instead of miles there. And so it's true. We've got to use in our 2D artwork, we've got to suggest vast spaces. And Paul Hussein showed me a little trick, as a matter of fact, falling back on Prince of Egypt, because a big part of Prince of Egypt was about scale, that vast Egyptian, epic, monumental. And we needed that depth to go on forever. At the same time, we needed good value structure. And by value, probably everyone on your channel checking in probably knows what I mean by that. But if not, just means the relative lights and darks. And we needed fairly simple values. The lights and darks needed to be simple and organized. People have to look at these scenes, and they have to be readable instantly. And so the value structures sometimes have to be simple. You can't do ultra dark foreground and let it get lighter and lighter and lighter all the way to white and have all these distracting contrasts in that range. And so he showed me where he'd cast a shadow like the clouds. There would be sunshine in the foreground, but then a shadow cast by clouds, and then a band of sunshine, and then a band of shadow moving back in the distance. And then the same thing in the sky. There'd be a group of light clouds, and then behind them a group of dark clouds, and then behind that a group of light clouds, back and forth, positive, negative, positive. And you can go back almost forever. And you can make it feel like, as far as your eyes can see, 100 kilometers, you can make it feel that way in 3 or 4 values. So it's an excellent question, because 2D has to mimic the 3D world in some way. We have to kind of light, cheat, and still to make that happen.
Oh, that's interesting. I always think a little bit of mist here and there works well.
That too? Folks, I get worried. I overuse mist works so well. It's so easy to overuse it. So I try and get a little restraint because it's just so tempting.
Yeah. Let's have another look. I got a good question for you. Do you independently choose the specifics for any painting for, say, a DreamWorks job? And how has that influenced your style?
I remember the transition because it's a collaboration. An animated movie, especially a feature animated movie, I mean, it's something like 600 artists and technicians, who ultimately touch all of the animators and digital artists and lighters and texture artists, and so many different people are involved. It's a heavy collaboration, which I am such a better artist because these people have influenced me, and I've worked with their ideas and they've worked with my ideas. And maybe someone is an amazing layout artist and lays out this gorgeous scene, and then back in those days there was a layout department. They would the ideas would be sketched out, and then there would be an official layout done, because the animated characters need to do what they're going to do. They can't be walking into walls accidentally. So there has to be a proper layout. And then I would do things like I would look at the initial sketches, the initial ideas, storyboards, and I would do color paintings, color comps. We called them color keys, as a matter of fact. And so my job would be to do the color design, the lighting design, the composition, meaning, the arrangements of lights and darks and shapes, those kinds of things. And then based on those color sketches and the finished layout drawing, I would do the finished painting, and then the animated characters would be composited over that. Very much a collaboration. Gradually, that went away for the CG animated movies. Shrek. We did Shrek. Toy Story came out, and that became the thing. And at that time, I became, we'd call it a visual development artist, where you're on the front end sketching out. A story is given to you. I'm not a writer. There's a story, but it's my job to visualize the story. Mm. And so I always loved contributing to the lighting design, the color, and we do something called a color script that kind of lays out the whole roller coaster ride of the movie, so we know the context of each part. Each little piece. It's like the jazz musicians say, if you want to get up, you got to get down. If you want a really high moment to really get your audience, you got to take your audience all the way down to a low point. And then at that low point, then you lift them all the way back up. And it's such a better experience for the audience. So I remember the time when you kind of, fake it till you make it. And I got to contribute to the color script. All of us did. I remember we did a spin-off of Shrek, The Legend of Puss in Boots. And by that time, I was kind of known for my color and lighting work. And they turned the color script over to me for the first time. And they just act as if, oh, yeah, you're a color script artist. Do the color script for the movie. And this was the first time that it was all riding on my shoulders. And so it went reasonably well. I was nervous, and as always, they loved some stuff, and other stuff they had lots of notes, and we pushed and pulled on it. But so that was the first time that it really fell on my shoulders to ultimately to make the call. What kind of light is going to tell that part of the story? What kind of color is going to tell that part of the story? I got to make those decisions in just sequentially previously, but now it's the whole enchilada, baby. And that was kind of the transition point for me.
Yeah, I did the colour and light class on Schoolism, and you actually go through that quite detailed, and it is quite complicated.
It's, oh my gosh. Well, it wasn't until, let's see, I was mentioning I started working professionally in 94, started animation in 1996. And when was The Legend of Puss in Boots? 2008, 7? Well, so it was a good, I'd had about a decade of experience by that point. Because you're right, oh my gosh, there's so many moving parts.
Yeah. I had a go at creating my own, and I was like, whoa, this is harder than I thought. It looks so easy, but it is not.
Well, as if art wasn't hard enough already.
Yeah. Let's go into another question, because that kind of goes in with what you was just saying. What's the best way to capture light to create a mood?
Oh boy. That is such a big question. You're pushing me in the position to pitch my class, because you have to take the whole, you have to take that weeks to answer that question. But it's one of the most important questions. I'll tell you what I've done that is very helpful, which is the obvious answer, but maybe I can just say it by way of encouraging people to really stay on top of their game. When I was in art school, I felt like, there have always been lots of good artists out there to study and admire. And there was, the animation thing coming on the horizon, the concept art, we might call it. And there was commercial illustration and editorial. And I felt like, oh, I'd love to do work like this artist. I'd love to do that and the other thing. And I realized I really have to focus my efforts. I have to decide. I was feeling like a ship, a sailing ship with the wind coming from all different directions, which means you go nowhere. I've got to get that one directional wind in my sail to really make progress. And so I decided, well, I love places. I love landscape painting. I love the idea of drawing and painting people, and I love the art of the imagination. How can I get good at that? So I did 3 things. I did tons of master studies. It's the human way. You study from a master, learn what they know, add your own to that, and take it hopefully further and higher and further. And so today we can study with tens of thousands of different masters through the internet. And so I started doing tons of just quick little 1 hour master studies to learn from the artists I admire most. But we can't just do that. Uh, we've got to do our own thing. So I got outside the landscape painting. I became a fanatic about landscape painting. Just every week getting out and trying to do like 1 hour sketches, trying to capture the sense of the moment before it goes away. And then the third thing is all this stuff that we're learning, we got to bring it back out from imagination. So the third was sketch out my own ideas and paint my own ideas to try and use imagination to apply what I've been learning from master studies and from life. And I did those three things in about equal measure, and it really it really got the ball rolling. As a matter of fact, I'll add to it this, because when I started at DreamWorks, that was my first animated movie. And it turns out that my department supervisor didn't know when we started on that show that this was my first animated movie. I think he just kind of assumed, oh yeah, people hear their experience. They've become from Disney. They've done this, they've done that. And so he gave me for my first big color assignment, gave me these color keys that I've been talking about. That's heavy professional level. You're designing a sequence of the movie. And I was just panicked. I was panicked. I was clever enough. We went over the sequence that I was going to be working on. The movie had been broken down in about 25 sequences, and I was going to be in charge of one of those sequences. And so we went over it. I was clever enough to say, oh yeah, it's great. Wow, I've got this locked. Give me a little bit of time and I'll show you some ideas. It's going to be fantastic. And then they close the door and you start to sweat. But the thing about it was, I had never done color keys for an animated movie ever before, but I had done color sketches. I had done them literally by the thousands in the previous several years. The master studies, the studies from life, and the little sketches and comps, color comps painted from imagination. And that was just totally on my own. I wasn't paid for any of it. I did it after I was out of art school as my own personal study. If I hadn't have done that, I had a job, I had this job. It was often 10 hours a day of hard work. If I hadn't have done this additional study, I would have crashed, and maybe I wouldn't have even gotten in the door at DreamWorks. But if I did, I would have crashed and burned. And you have a 6-month rider on your contract where in your contract, after 6 months, they're allowed to evaluate you and decide, well, it isn't working out. You aren't adapting to what we're doing here. And so legally, thank you for what you've done so far, but it's not going to work for us. And that's what I was facing. And that's what I was worried about, was that 6-month mark. But because of this study, I had some ideas. I pitched the ideas, and I must have done. I did so many of them. I was so nervous. I did just dozens and dozens and dozens of sketches. Then I was clever enough to pick like the best 5 or 6, take them to the art director and say, here's a few sketches I did, on a napkin. I was wondering if any of them are going in a direction that you like. And there was one of them where she felt like the art director, she felt like there was something to it, and we went forward in that direction. And I got to handle the sequence. And so for people watching the royal banquet sequence of the Prince of Egypt, where the Pharaoh comes out with Ramses and announces that he's Prince Royal Architect of Egypt, and it turns into a big theatrical party. That's mine. That's my sequence. And man, it was right on the edge between success and crash and burn. I walked that line.
So for people watching then, for especially like self-taught artists, doing master studies, it's an invaluable thing.
Invaluable. I would say do one a day. At least do one little study a day, even if you're too tired. We have those days. Just do a little. At least do a little. Get out your pencil. Do a little tiny thumbnail. put a square, a circle, a triangle together in an interesting way. Just something every day, because it 365 of those adds up.
I've got another question.
All right.
Is there any of the movies you've worked on and you thought, this is the best one that I've ever worked on?
Well, everyone already knows that the answer to that will be The Prince of Egypt. So I'll talk about a different one that was surprisingly, it was my second favorite movie to work on after Prince of Egypt was all new, it was big. And I'll say one other thing about Prince of Egypt, just if I don't know, you'll have to stop me because I'll kind of drift off into a haze of glory days and you'll have to get me back on track. But Steven Spielberg, who was of course, one of the principals of DreamWorks, he had Amblimation, an animation studio in London. And some of the best animators and artists from all over Europe were working there. And when DreamWorks was started in Los Angeles, they closed it down. But they invited those artists to come out to Los Angeles. And so it was a melting pot. We had lots of artists that had come over from Disney, that we had people that were new like me. We had all these artists from all over Europe. And so that was just the most amazing experience. That's kind of the obvious one. The one that was a big surprise was just, what was it, about 6 years ago? I got a call from Disney. That sounds great, right? I got a call from Disney. That's the call that you hope for. You love a phone call where they say, this is Disney.
Yeah.
But it was not to work on a big feature animated movie. They invited me to work on a movie called The Pirate Fairy. And it was Peter Pan, Never Never Land, and that whole genre. It was the story of how Captain Hook became Captain Hook, kind of his backstory built into a movie. And it was part of the Tinkerbell series. They were doing these series of shows. Tinkerbell was the main character, and it's centered around the Fairy Hollow on the island, Never Never Land, and all of that. Well, so I got this call, and of course I was excited at the opportunity to work for Disney, but I think they had done 3 of these movies already. And I'm not the primary audience. I hadn't seen any of them. I was a little bit hesitant, I never thought of myself as like Tinkerbell, But they said, well, listen, watch, we're proud of the shows we've done so far. Even though the budget is much smaller than a huge theatrical presentation, we fought as hard as we could to bring a theatrical quality to these movies. Just watch them, and we think you'll like it. So I said, sure, yeah, I definitely want to do that. Well, I'll say the same thing to anyone out there watching. It might not be your thing, but maybe anyone out there has a daughter. Sit down with your daughter and watch some of these Tinkerbell movies, The Great Escape, and like I say, the one I was on was The Pirate Fairy. But I watched these, and they were beautiful. The art direction was good. The lighting was good. It wasn't kind of cheap, 3D models with just rough digital lighting thrown on. This was real Disney art direction. And then they needed someone to color script the next one. And they were asking me to do what this real beautiful Disney art direction had been previously. And it wasn't just me, it was myself and another artist named Fred Warder, really great. And so he and it looked great. I was excited to do it. And we sat down and we color scripted this entire show. Well, you got to understand, feature animation, as much as I rah, hey, isn't it great? We've got to work on a movie. At the same time, it's brutal, it's bone crushing. And a part of that is the fear and the nervousness in feature animation. For good reason. Any of these feature animated movies, they're somewhere in the range of $200 million at stake. $200 million. Wow. You mess that up, you're not just out on the street, they're going to throw your whole family out on the street, and slam the door on So there's a lot of fear and tension and nervousness, and there's a lot of the attitude of, well, your work looks good, but is it the right kind of good? And it's a reasonable question. I'm not critical. I understand the position that these people are in. So on this show, they had this deadline. The show had to be done by this date. They said, Nathan, we trust you. We like your color and light. This other artist, Fred, was amazing. He and I sat down and we color scripted this entire movie. Everybody left us alone. We were cranking out something like 30 color keys a week to work out. We did a painting or two for every single scene in the movie, and wow. It's believable lighting, but also a lot of magic, theatrical, magical kind of lighting. I love that stuff because you get to design the local colors, meaning, the costumes and the trees, the flowers, the color that everything is, in concert with these amazing variety of natural and magical lights. And you can really make things shimmer when you have the combination. And so we just did it, and they left us alone and they trusted us. I had the greatest time. And so this little, kind of home video style movie, second best experience of my career.
That does sound amazing, actually. Let's go for, you've covered that. That's covered. Oh, this was an interesting comment. Because I've never actually heard of the Hudson River School. Have you heard of them?
I have heard of them.
Are you a fan?
I am a big fan.
Yeah. Someone noticed when they saw one of your pictures. I think we've covered all my questions. Going back to something you said. Do you actually feel the pressure when you're doing the work for these big studios? And do you think, I don't know, this is a bit hard for me?
Well, I'd love to say, oh yeah, I've been at this for 25 years. I've got it down. That would be a lie. Jason, it is horrifying. It's the caliber of artists out there. And especially, the people coming up, they have so much more in terms of tools and training. There was no concept art, no animation art training. The college I went to, it was a good art college, but there was no animation program. There was no, and now there's so much available. So people are coming up hard and fast. They're really good. They have to have so much to draw from. And every project, I'll throw out a little anecdote about all these different projects because I have credit on, I think it's 12 feature animated movies, but we did so many that we tried out an idea and the studio decided not to go forward with it. And so at DreamWorks, and I was there for 15 years until I went independent, I working from a variety of places now, but every time you work on a new show, they move you to a new office because each show, they put you on your own floor. And so everyone's together in a group. And so you move offices every time you work on a new project. The last project I worked on at DreamWorks, I went down to the facilities office to get my new key for my new office. And they had the original card. You have to sign for your key, They had the original card that I'd signed for my very first key 15 years before. And so I counted how many times I'd signed for a new key for a new office. It was 20 of them.
20 offices?
20 offices. Yeah, and 20 projects that I worked on at DreamWorks. Wow. And I remember one day it was the 19th office. I know you might have to pull me back because I'm drifting back into Never Neverland. I promise I'll get back to the fear factor. The fear factor of working on these projects is there's actually a reason to wander into this topic. I remember, I think it was my 18th or 19th office. I went to lunch and I had been in a new office for about 2 weeks. and was all moved in. You know, was there. I'd been for 2 weeks. I went to lunch, and I came back from lunch, started to walk to my office. I'm like, wait, where's my office again? And I literally could not think of it. Like, I was like, no, I'm in the feature animation. No, that was the last one. I'm not in the feature animation building anymore. I'm down. No. And I literally, it took me like 4 or 5 minutes to remember, because like I was piling all these anyway. So in this business, you work on a lot of different projects. And even if you've had a breadth of experience, every time the movie is a new story with new settings, new environments, new demands. You're working with a new group of people. I've worked with a lot of the same people, but there's always new people as well. You're often working with a new director, new producers. Maybe the production designer is the head of everything visual, kind of the visual director. You might be working with a new production designer. Every single time you have to prove yourself to this new group of people. And so even now I've been working Paramount Animation. Paramount has started up their own animation studio in recent years, and I felt really honored to have been invited to do their first show, and we're starting on our second show now. So just literally right now, I'm starting with a new director, getting to know him. Great guy, great project, but and working with some people I've worked with before, have a comfortable working relationship with. But other people I know, they're going to be looking at my work saying, we hope we hired the right person for this show. There's that 6-month thing, after a certain amount of time passes, they could say, well, you're good, Nathan, but are you the right good? I face that every single time, and it's nerve-wracking and horrifying. So it never goes away.
Here's a question that is actually leading to something. Someone has said, is there anything that you struggled drawing or painting, and then how did you combat it? And I know you got into portraits quite heavily, and I have this book.
Oh, hey, all right.
Because I remember in one of the videos, you were saying you really wanted to get good at on the Schoolism, and you started your own. Or you went to, did you go to a university and start a class up, or so you could practice at the same time?
That's exactly. Yeah, and people can. I wrote the story in my book there, How to Draw Portraits in Charcoal from Design Studio Press. Thank you for the promo. Yeah, because I mentioned that the book starts, the drawings in the book start at a specific point. I think it was the year 2000. We'd done several movies at DreamWorks, and I had always wanted to do, I'd done portrait all through art school, and DreamWorks was kind enough, twice a week, they would have uninstructed life drawing or painting. Once a week were short poses, sketching, doing figurative and sketching people. And then the other time during the week was one long pose, 1 3-hour. I tell you, I don't know if I ever missed that. I mean, I'm sure I did somewhere along the way, but I tried to never, ever miss those 2 sessions every week. So I was serious about it. But twice a week can help you get good. But being good isn't enough when your dream is to be really great. And so I went to DreamWorks and I asked for a sabbatical. We'd done 3 films. And I was itching to get back to kind of my roots of doing this. And I was able to work out a 6-month sabbatical where it was great because I had a contract to come back. So I took unpaid, but I knew there was a job waiting for me. So that felt good. And I went to a local art school, kind of like an atelier centered around life drawing. But they also had a few, being Los Angeles, they had a few illustration and animation type classes as well. And I went to them and said, hey, my name's Nathan. I showed them my work and I said, I'm a DreamWorks artist and I'm taking this time off. And I was wondering if you'd be interested. I could teach a class here and teach about what we do at DreamWorks and the kind of animation art that I do. And I'm actually not looking to be paid, but I'm interested in sitting in on the classes and your daily uninstructed sessions so I can really dig in. Well, they were interested. It's good for them. They can advertise and market. Hey, we have a DreamWorks artist on staff. They were enthusiastic about that. It sounds good.
Yeah.
And, I pitched them the same way. And so I did this for 6 months, and for 5 days a week, I showed up at 8:45 a.m. to be set up for the 9 a.m. start time. We'd take noon to 1, we'd take lunch, and then we'd draw all morning and then paint all afternoon. We'd stop at 4, and there'd be a break like from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., dinner, siesta, whatever you want to call it. We'll call it a siesta. We're right next to Mexico over here. It's a good lifestyle. But then we'd come back. I'd come back from 7 to 10 p.m. for the night session. So I did that, and I never missed for 6 months 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. Saturday, I'd go out and do landscape painting all day long. And then Sunday, I would take a break. You gotta recharge a little bit. So Sunday was kind of my day off to do personal, get out, whatever. And so I know here I am trying to brag about how dedicated I was during that period. I know what everyone's thinking, though. Everyone's thinking, yeah, you clearly had no life, Nathan. You had nothing going on that you could go off and do this thing. Well, it's true. I could, and so I did, doggone it. But that kind of, I like to say, and we know repetition leads to refinement of our skills, which ultimately leads to mastery. And it's that daily plugging along that daily mileage that ultimately can get you there. I don't feel like I have some kind of special talent or was born and with a talent that other people don't have. A lot of artists are quite fearful that they don't have it. And so out of that fear, we dig in and become maniacal about it, like I was, and almost go into a mania, desperately trying to find it and to catch it. But that's what I think. Rather than talent, that's what I think the road to mastery is. And so that's where that book starts, with those drawings, and then I've kept it up as best I can ever since. But that the life drawing and the traditional drawing and painting was a big part of what got me into DreamWorks. And it's a big part of what's continued to create opportunities for me. We have a lot of kind of flash and bang digital artists coming up where they kind of go the dark side. They go the dark route where they rely on the tricks of the tools. They go for the quick and easy kaboom. And it gets them, can get them to about, they can do some pretty amazing stuff. It gets them to about here. But guess what? There's 10,000 other people who also fairly easily, if they have the right tools, get to there. And if you want your head to stand above the crowd, it's those hard-won principles, where the principles drive the tools instead of vice versa. Because ultimately, my experience, I see those people, they come up, they're a flash in the pan, and then the tools change and they kind of fall by the wayside.
That's another question I got for you, actually. Do you, out of all the traditional tools you've used, like acrylics, oils, gouache, charcoals, is there any one of those tools your favorite? Yes.
I definitely favor watercolors, and I use white gouache with my watercolors. I paint pretty opaquely with my watercolors. I use watercolor straight out of the tube, so it has a lot of body. It dries out in the palette like watercolors do, but if you have a good watercolor like maybe Winsor Newton, and it'll dry on your palette, but you spritz it in a good watercolor, it just takes 5 minutes. It reabsorbs that water, gets really loose and really workable. And that's the reason that I prefer that medium. When I started at DreamWorks, it was pre-digital art. We painted everything in acrylics. I love acrylics, but you take them outside and they dry in your palette, they dry in your brushes, out in this California sun, and it dries on your palette. You can't scrape that stuff off. You can eat your dinner off of acrylics and it's not gonna hurt anything. It's gonna dry in your brushes and kill your brushes real fast. So oil painting, of course, is an amazing painting medium, especially for landscapes. portability is a challenge. Dryability is a challenge. And I found because landscape painting is not my primary career, I'm kind of a weekend warrior, a get in and get out. And so oils was a fight, a battle. And I found myself fighting the medium as much as I was painting. So through experimentation, the watercolors, and I like to be able to paint opaquely. And when you're painting with oils or acrylics, white is an important part of your palette. So I used white in the same way with my watercolors and just painted the same kind of approach. And that was the thing, because sure, they dry out, but you just spritz them, they come right back to life. And so instead of fighting the medium, I could just paint. And so that became my sketching medium. And then gradually that medium kind of came back into the studio as my studio medium. I just came to love it. And so, for instance, right now, I'm really excited. I have a gallery show coming up next month at a gallery nucleus here in Los Angeles. And it's a show of my studio and landscape paintings. Landscape paintings I did both in the studio and outdoors. And I've been using the same medium, indoors, outdoors, putting this show together. And it's become, I don't want to call it a comfort zone, because it's always a bit of a mess and a bit of a frustration. And that never goes away. But there's kind of a joy that you just step away from it, maybe do a little digital painting, come back to the traditional, do some traditional painting, go back to the digital. And that's the thing about the way I've set up my studio here where I am right now. This is my digital setup, but on other side of my computer screens right over there is my traditional painting setup. And so I kind of what I take advantage of in the studio is it's a bit of the grass is always greener. You know, I'm digitally painting, digital painting. Oh, my eyes are getting sore looking at the screen. I've been doing this for hours. I can switch and do some traditional sketching, you know, and the paint turns into a mess. I get frustrated. And I'm like, man, I just wish I could do digital painting where it's clean, you know, it doesn't go everywhere. And I come back to do. And so that's kind of my little life hack for productivity. I take a break from painting by doing other painting. And so I get a lot done. You know, I do my digital animation work, and then I get some paintings done for this gallery show coming up. So that's my favorite little life hack. Take a break from doing art that you're sick of by doing other art that you're itching to do until you get sick of that and come back to it. It's a one, well, I want to call it a beautiful loop. The truth is more of a hamster wheel, right? Instead of a hamster wheel, but a productive one.
That's a good idea, actually. Thanks very much for coming on my show. I think we'll wrap it up there. If anyone is interested in hearing more stories and instructional videos, the best place is Schoolism, where there's 4 videos, and there's one about gouache and watercolors, there's a color and light one, there's environmental design, there's pictorial composition, and they all mold together, I find. And I'll put a link in the description, because I did the courses and I was blown away. I was like, where were these courses 10 years ago? I needed these. And so yeah, all the links will be in the description, and also the book I really like as well, because it does partner quite well with the courses, because there was some bits where, because I'm a slow learner really, and there was some bits that I was like, I don't quite get that about the light and which area of light and dark to use and things, but you mentioned it again in the book, and I was like, I think I get it now.
It's a hamster wheel, right? You got to do a little of everything, and it all eventually gels.
Yeah. So thanks very much for coming on the show. Do you have any final words of wisdom for the watchers? Or?
Well, you know, I'll say to everyone out there, I'm proud of my classes. Nobody has to take my classes. But you mentioned what the titles are. And so I chose those titles very carefully, because I think those directions are critically important. So as artists, there's to me, there's the big 3. if we're going to be artists, we have to have a mastery of color and light. And we have to be a master of creating places. Think of any painting, it's in a setting, unless it's an abstraction, which is a fun thing. But it's in a place, and we have to be masters of places. And then as artists, we're picture makers. We have got to be master picture makers. And, in one way or another, whatever our tools are, whatever our approach or technique has to be, we're painters. And so in addition to those three, I have my painting class, because those are the big four directions. And the point of all of them ultimately is the same thing. You mentioned the Hudson River School of Painters. And what I love about them is they weren't just landscape painters. They knew what they wanted to bring to the audience. They were very specific. I'm not just doing a landscape painting. There's a romanticism in that landscape that I need the technical and artistic ability to bring across. And so those four topics that I just mentioned, those are what we use to reach out and grab our audience at that emotional level where storytelling lives. And so if anyone, looking for a direction or focus, I think those are the topics that might take us the distance as artists.
Well, thanks very much for being on the show, and I hope everyone's enjoyed watching this. I have, actually. I've been kind of just sat back watching.
All right, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Cheers, bye.